Hey everyone, and welcome to the February edition of 3030. I am your host, Pat Reinhart of Conductor, and as always, thank you so much for spending 30 minutes of your valuable time with me. Let's get into it of what's been going on over the last 30 days. There's been quite a few things. Number one, we're going to talk about how quiet Google has actually been, over the last 30 days, which is not really the normal right now, right? Over the last, couple of years, especially over the last 12 months, Google has been incredibly volatile. But it sounds like they're taking a nice long winter nap right now, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I want to go through analysis I did of healthcare sites. So anyone that works in healthcare on the line, have some stuff that's specific to you. But I think it's interesting for the whole group just to see, how polarizing some of the results are over this analysis that I did. Once again, I do want to talk about. I've been getting a lot of questions about Core Web Vitals, and EEAT, and if they are ranking factors or not. This is also something that a lot of people are talking about, in the industry. If you're on the regular blogs and you're on all that, like a lot of people, I think, are a little bit confused on what a ranking factor is, and it's always interesting to me. And I think someone actually cracked Danny Sullivan because he went on pretty long rants about this. So we're going to talk about those two things as well. Friendly reminder that IMP will replace FID in your Core Web Vitals. Speaking of Core Web Vitals, on March 12th. So if you are tracking FID right now, then that will be going away. And then we will round it out with our ongoing segment of this month in SGE. But let's get into it because we only have 30 minutes. Number one, everybody. The sleeping giant right now, right? Google's a little bit of a sleeping giant. And it's been really quiet over the last 30 days, which is not necessarily a bad thing. So I've been talking to a lot of folks around the industry, and I've been getting a lot of questions from folks, here and there about, hey, haven't really seen anything announced by Google. Did I miss something? No one has really been talking about any major tremors or things of that nature. And honestly, that's kind of what's happening, everybody. After, really, when you think about it, from August on, it was nothing but algorithm updates and shifts and things of that nature. And outside of a few tremors that happened on January 24th to 26th, and then February 8th and into the 9th, outside of a few doomsday commenters going out there being like, it's like, oh, my site's down 30 or 50% and all that junk. It's really been quiet out there across most verticals. And that's kind of what I'm hearing around, looking through Conductor's data. Not a lot of spikes anywhere. There's the regular volatility in like news sites and things of that nature. But for the most part, not a lot of volatility going on. From that perspective, what I'm thinking is this is a good thing. It's good that we've had this time to take a step back and reflect on the last 12 months, without being berated by, 5 or 6 algorithm updates. But I think we can all, kind of rest easy at the moment. But that doesn't mean that something's not coming. Obviously, the next one is right around the corner. We don't know when that is necessarily, but my guess is we will start, we will be welcomed by some form of update in the near future. One thing that I have been noticing, and, let me know if you're seeing the same thing, I have been seeing a little bit of positive movement on the war with spam. When looking at, really multiple verticals, but retail in particular is just one that I happen to frequent in my day-to-day. But I've been seeing a lot of the spam results that have been plaguing a lot of sites start to subside. I am not saying they are gone by any stretch of the imagination. They are certainly still there. But it's interesting to see that, when Google, put out, those 5 or 6 tremors after the November updates rolled out through December. And, right up until about January 18th is when those stopped. There really I have started to see it subside a little bit. So hopefully what they have put into place is going to start cutting that junk out. But at the end of the day, over the last 30 days, it's been very quiet, everyone. And I think we should all, smoke if you got them, right? Take 5 for a minute, sit back and see where the site's at. But don't be, don't think that this is going to be the norm. We're certainly going to see something come around the corner, and over the next few months. So we always have to be prepared for that. But I'm not going to lie to you, it's been a nice break to kind of take a minute, be able to actually absorb what happened over the final 6 months of 2023, and kind of do some analysis without another major thing going out and blowing up the analysis that you're currently doing. But from that perspective, I'm gonna take 5 here and enjoy this time off. But with that said, speak of analyses and kind of going back and looking. So I had the pleasure of speaking at a customer event last Monday, which was it really was a lot of fun. There was like over 100 marketers there. Drove down to Philly, love Philly, and and it was a lot of fun. And when I was going down there, I had been doing this analysis for the healthcare vertical anyway, and so I had decided to put that in the presentation, and then wanted to share it here because I know we always get a lot of folks that work in healthcare here. But found some really interesting results. So when you look at, and this is across, a couple of hundred sites, when you're pulling the data in the cohort that we have marked as, healthcare, when you look at it, total rankings overall. So the way to read this is that largely, like if you average everything together, right, for the healthcare sector, if you average everything together for total rankings, meaning all rankings in the top 100, healthcare sites were on average up 9%, right? And for page one visibility, so everything that's just in the top 10, because I don't even know if I can say page one anymore. So just think top 10. If you average everything together, all those sites and all of the movement and volatility that they had, across the year, overall, they landed up 4% in the top 10, which is interesting, right? It's like, okay, so when you look at that, you're probably like, oh, so healthcare overall was up. Technically, yes. Overall, if you look at all of those sites and you do all the averages, healthcare was up. You could say, yes, healthcare was up in 2023. But the interesting part is when you start breaking those cohorts down and you look at the very polarizing results when you look at sites that were in decline and sites that were on the rise. Now, when you look at sites that were in decline, on average, if a site was heading in the wrong direction, that decline averaged a 16% loss. So this is just averaging all the sites that were in decline over that same period, 16% decline. So, and when a site was in decline from a top 10 perspective, they were 22% down. So again, so when a site was down, they were down, man. And the same is true of ones that were on the rise. Like on average, when the site was on the rise, meaning that they were heading in the right direction, on average, those sites were up 35%. And when a site for overall rankings, and 24% for top 10. So when a site was in decline, sites were down, and when the sites were up and hitting the wave, those sites were hitting the skies, and and had great years. And it's really interesting to see the differences because all of these sites that I'm about to show you are all similar types of content, similar types of companies. But here's a site that lost 19% of their top 10 visibility. And as you can see here, the interesting part about this is that when a site was in decline, it wasn't that it just lost page one visibility. It lost rankings, like completely. Rankings just completely dropped out of the top 100 that they were previously ranking for. And I'm not saying that all of those keywords were valuable, but it's a pretty stark difference here when you look at these numbers. So 19% of their top 10 visibility for this site. And again, not a small site, as you can see the numbers. Then here's a site that gained 39% between January 23 and January 24. So again, another huge site. So think about that. Starting here, this site started at like say 2.7 million, let's say that. It wound up, and where it is today is about 3.8 million, call it. Like that is, think about that. Think about the increase there, 39% of top 10 visibility for this site. Now here's another site in decline. And you're going to see that an interesting trend here is that when a site was down, they weren't just losing page one visibility, they were losing rankings completely. And again, that's an interesting finding to me anyway. But here's another site that lost 16% of its top visibility. Again, not a small site, going from 110,000 keywords down to 50 or 60,000 keywords. That's a huge decline. You're losing a ton of visibility here. And then here's another one. Again, Sites that were on the increase, you can see here, top 10 visibility increased 15% here. Again, not a small site, but you can see that when something was gaining, they weren't just gaining on page one, they were gaining overall. And when a site was in decline, they were not just losing page one visibility, they were just losing rankings in general. So something interesting to take away, that a lot, like, and a major shift here is that, again, typically you're showing like, oh, well, number on page one or this, but this was taking swaths of keywords completely out of the top 100, which to me seems much more, the word's like violent, than usual. But it's an interesting finding, especially within the healthcare sector, where it was much more stark than other verticals. Is this true of other verticals? Not really. I looked into a bunch of financial sites, similar amount of financial sites. Everything was single digits, one way or the other. Some, more normal ebbs and flows that you would see. Retail was more normal ebbs and flows, for that type of, those types of sites. But but healthcare was pretty stark, and it was really interesting to see the different, to see when something was up, it was up both in page one and total rankings. But when something was down, it wasn't just down on page one visibility, it was down in general, like down in the top 100. So just an interesting trend for anyone that's working in healthcare. Be aware of that, because that is that's a little bit different than what I typically see when big changes like what happened at the back half of last year happen. Typically, you're seeing most of the volatility happening on page one. You're not seeing sites just tank and lose 40% of their rankings overall, which is really interesting. Here's another one. As you can see, lost 14% of their top 10 visibility. And again, when you look at it, it's not just page one visibility, it's visibility overall. So just really an interesting trend, and thought I thought this group would find that interesting. But again, were there similar trends across other verticals? Sure. But healthcare was probably the most pronounced, is probably the best way to put it. So let's move on from there and talk about everyone's favorite subject, Core Web Vitals. So on Twitter, which I do not frequent, but I am somewhat of a voyeur because I only follow X amount of people. So someone was, going back and forth with, Danny Sullivan, who runs Search Liaison, and for the most part, what happened is that everyone keeps confusing Core Web Vitals with an actual ranking factor, right? And, as SEOs, SEOs are people that overthink things sometimes, and most of the time. And, they want to find a silver bullet where there really is no silver bullet. We're all guilty of this, myself included. But I think one thing that has changed over the years is that I think the industry as a whole has gotten better, understanding that, like things like Core Web Vitals are more of a concept. And yes, there are numbers associated with that concept. But it's not that, like, if your Core Web Vitals score is X, your ranking is going to change. It's more a piece of the experience factor that they take into account. And Core Web Vitals is a part of that, which I know is a little confusing, but a lot of times, and you can see this, like Danny Sullivan started to get really, annoyed with people. The next one is actually even worse, when we start talking about EEAT. But basically what was said is that someone said, like, hey, Core Web Vitals is a small ranking signal. It's like publishers need guidance. We can't be held to standards Google can't pass. And basically someone was giving them crap about, Core Web Vitals and it being a small ranking factor, which, Google, again, has not done a great job explaining over the years, to be real with you. So, the confusion is not surprising. And again, I get a ton of questions on this on a weekly basis. Like, hey, like, what should my score be? It's not about the score. To be real with everybody, most sites, and I've said this on the program before, most sites that I work on, and again, I look across thousands a year, most sites fall in between 50 and 65 on an average performance page score, right? If you average the site across, most sites fall in the 50 to 65 range. Very few sites fall above that, right? And for folks that spend time and money on it, that's all well and good. Hey, listen, you want to show an 80% performance score, for your Core Web Vitals, that's totally fine. But honestly, like, unless your score is like a 10 or in the teens, and then you change it and get it to like a 50 or 60, in my experience, you are not going to see a marked improvement on anything, especially from a ranking perspective. You're just going to put yourself in a better position for the experience factors that Google puts into, which I cannot define because they don't define them. No one can really define them. But again, Core Web Vitals is just a small piece to a larger puzzle. And again, you can see, Danny said it here. It's like, it doesn't say it's a ranking factor, just like the Core Web Vital page doesn't say that. This, along with other, talks about these things aligning to what we do measure page experience aspects, which aligns to what our core ranking systems seek to reward. Now, does anyone know what that means? Not really. Again, that's more gibberish about, like aligns to what our core ranking systems seek to reward. What Danny is trying to say is that the factors, again, like the actual factors that go into this are really nebulous, and we know they're nebulous. And Core Web Vitals are a piece of that nebulousness, which is not a word. But from that perspective, like, it's not about like, oh my God, if I get my Core Web Vital performance score to 80, I'm going to rank number 1 in Google. It's not. It's a small piece of the pie. And really, that tool is just there for you to understand if your site has a good experience when a user comes through it. And does Google take that into account? 100%. Does it matter if you're at a 55 or a 75? 100% not. And I can tell you that in my experience, there is no bigger time waster or money drainer than Core Web Vitals work. Because when you get to that threshold of, like, say you're 60 on average, it's like, okay, it's a 60. Tools may say you don't pass, and that's fine. That's all well and good. Now, if it's something that you got nothing else to do, and you're like, hey man, my site's perfect. So yeah, spend time and money on Core Web Vitals and get that score up. That's totally fine. But I can guarantee you that 99% of the time, there is something more impactful that you can do on your site than mess around with your Core Web Vitals score. So again, Core Web Vitals itself, not a ranking factor. It's part of the overall experience factors that Google look at it, but don't become obsessed with that number. And I know I've said this a million times on this show, but don't become obsessed with that number, because it'll lead you down a rabbit hole with absolutely no silver bullets at the bottom. And speaking of things not being ranking factors, let's talk about EEAT, something else that I get a lot of questions about. And I am not going to read this whole rant on the right-hand side of this, but as you can see, someone pinched a nerve here, with Danny, because basically what happened here was someone was talking about, EEAT ranking factors and them being a ranking factor. And again, it was basically two people going back and forth with one another, overthinking all of this and talking about authorship and things of that. And at the end of the day, you can read through this when you get the deck. But Danny basically said, is EEAT a ranking signal? And say, no, EEAT is not a ranking signal. And then someone asked him, you can see he's going through all of this, and he's becoming very upset as people talk about this, because they've explained this 2 million times. Again, I'm not even saying that they're saying it well. And just to answer the question in the chat, what EEAT is, it stands for experience, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. And basically, it's a fancy way of saying authorship and, proving why you're an authority in your space or on that topic, that whether that be through, brand recognition or, having a well-known entity in the space that can be proven in that space. So that's really what it comes around to. And from that, so thinking about that, the same thing goes, and I see the comment here about even about helpful content, what is that? I don't know. They don't really have a great definition for it. What they're trying to explain to everybody, and what everybody is taking as everything that they give you a hint about, is a secret ranking factor. Most of the time, Danny and Gary and John Mueller from Google are speaking to you about concepts that they have internally, right? Like EEAT is a concept. It is not a ranking factor. It is something that it is a guideline for you to follow to create better content, whether that's helpful or not. Again, helpful is a relative term. One person thinks this is helpful, person thinks it's not. But really, what they're all guidelines, but they're not the actual ranking factors. So again, as you're creating content, as you're thinking about EEAT and learning more about it, don't don't get caught up in, oh my God, I need to have an author page that links back to this and all that stuff. If you do that, I think that that's what you should do. And I've said that on this program and to many customers before. Like, that is what I think you should do. You should prove out who your authors are, but that's mainly for the users, and create the path so that Google can see the path, because that's what I've seen work for a lot of sites. But that's based on testing and actual data. But what they're talking about is more conceptual. It's about, hey, these are guidelines that we're giving you to try to understand how our ranking algorithms work, because they're just too damn complicated to explain in a 5-point bullet list. Of, hey, here are the things you need to do, because you have to do 100 things to satisfy all this, which we all know. But again, a lot of people become obsessed and overthink. Well, God, I have to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Really, what you have to do is just make the best site possible, make it run as best as you can. Don't become obsessed with a number from a third-party tool. That's all guidance. You need to know those numbers, because you need to be able to measure it, obviously. But you have to also realize that a lot of this stuff is conceptual, and it's not like, hey, if you can't hit an EEAT button and all of a sudden you rank. That's not really how it works. It's more about the guidelines, that they're giving you the path to walk, and here are the things that are included in that path that you should try to hit on as you create content. And that's really what it comes down to. So think about that as you go along. But from that perspective, again, a lot of this stuff just comes back to add schema to your site, create author pages, create great content, have someone in your company, be the face of the company, create media, create video, all that jazz. And you'll be fine. But again, don't obsess over Core Web Vitals scores, and don't obsess about EEAT metrics. There aren't any. Again, these are all guidelines. They're all concepts that Google has created to help guide you to how their very complicated algorithms work. And again, we as SEOs, we love to talk about ranking signals, and it's just like, oh man, I got all these signals. It's like this and that. Don't get caught up in that. It's like when Yandex's ranking factors leaked. People spent months going through that crap. That didn't change what anyone was doing, because there were hundreds of those things in there, and none of it really meant anything. It's just, okay, that some of these things that you already knew, everything that you're doing is probably, the basics are the right things to do. And largely it comes down to creating great content. And I know that is not groundbreaking, by the way, but at the end of the day, that's just what, that's just what people are, that's just what matters now. And to answer the question here, backlinks, everyone knows my opinion on backlinks. Again, you can gain backlinks by regular marketing activities. You do not need to pay for backlinking or engage in backlinking activities. If you're creating great content, people will link back to it. I have not built a link in over 17 years at this point, and I can tell you I've never had trouble getting a site to rank without that, because if you work with your marketing department or the PR firm that you're working with, or just whoever is running, who's ever helping you socialize that content, those links will come. And backlinks are just not a huge factor anymore, right? They're a last mile thing. Like if you're trying to get from number 5 to number 2, yeah, that might be a good idea to try and go out and get a link. That could probably help you in that situation. It's a last mile type thing. But again, like actively link building is more dangerous than ever right now. And I think that again, links used to be super important, and they are important today. I'm not saying they're not important, but they're not as important because there's so many more pieces to the pie now. Links are just a smaller slice of that pie. They used to be a bigger one. That's just how Google has evolved. Next thing, how we doing on time? Doing good, Pat. 2:23. Friendly reminder that IMP will be replacing FID on March 12th. I've shown this, I've shown this slide before, which is why I have the overlay here. If you want to, what that is one of the core Web Vital, page experience, number. So FID, again, will be going away, and then IMP, or interaction the next paint, will be taking over. Why are they doing this? Basically, Google believes that IMP is a better measure of a page's experience for that particular metric, which is totally fine. What can you do to prepare? When you get the deck, you can click here for Google's guidance on those things. But for the most part, given my rant on Core Web Vitals a few minutes ago, again, just go and monitor it in Search Console. Make sure that nothing is anemic or doing really poorly. So I think from that perspective, it's just something to, to keep in mind. And to answer another question here, like why bother with having all the measurement tools if Core Web Vital isn't a ranking factor? It's because you should know how your site interacts. Because again, while it's not a direct ranking factor, it influences ranking factors. Which again, I understand is confusing, but that is what Google is trying to tell everybody, that, like the numbers themselves aren't, Google is not taking that number into account. It is taking the overall experience of your site, which can be measured with those numbers, and considering them when they are looking at other overarching page experience factors. So again, it's not that it's trying to kind of trick anybody or make everyone think that they're not important. I'm not saying they're not important. They're just not as important as a lot of people believe they are. Again, it's more for you than for anything, so that you understand how is Google seeing your site. And if your site has a better experience, it'll do better. But again, everything has to work together. And that's the whole thing. There's so many factors. This is just a small piece of it, but it is a piece of it. Although it's not a direct ranking factor, it influences larger factors. So again, I know that's a little confusing, but that's kind of how to think about it. And which is why, again, they're not important, but they're not the end all be all, right? They're not as important as creating great content and making sure the technical, and making sure that your site isn't like flush with broken links or, links to canonicalized pages or crap like that, right? So just keep that in mind, right? But March 12th, if you are measuring this and you're reporting on it, that's the main reason I put this in here, because I know a lot of people do report on Core Web Vital metrics. So FID is going away. IMP is taking it over. IMP, you've been able to report on that for a while. So if you do report it, you've probably switched over by now. But March 12th is D-Day. So let's move on to our monthly segment and talk about SGE in the last 5 minutes here. So I've shown this slide to many, many, many people. And one thing, and I don't typically read slides to folks, but, we've been talking a lot about SGE and when is this thing going to launch? I have said personally that, I think it's probably going to launch sometime in the summer. I think they're still having trouble figuring out where to put ads and, how to, to monetize it properly, or if it's the right experience at all. And, Google released this, right? Which I think is interesting. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but I'm going to read one line. We've gotten lots of useful feedback from people who've chosen to join this experiment, and will continue to offer SGE in labs as a testbed for bold new ideas. We'll continue to offer SGE in labs as a testbed for bold new ideas. Now, being an SEO for the last 20 years, I'm going to read into this. And, I've talked to a lot of folks about it. My opinion is that Google is not really ready to launch this thing. And I think that from that perspective, it's something that we all need to take into account. Is that, is SGE coming? Probably at some point, right? They have not figured it all out yet, probably mainly the ads aspect of it. But Google is not ready to launch this, and they're going to leave it as a beta for now. And I think from my perspective, that's probably a good thing. I don't hate the SG. I don't hate SGE. I truly don't. I think that there could be a lot of benefit to it. And I think it could, really shake up the industry and, put more emphasis on creating even better content than people do now. But, again, you're going to have the hard time about combating, AI garbage. But again, that's just the next iteration, right? It's the next evolution of all this. But I think that, reading this, I think Google just isn't ready to launch this thing yet, and I don't know if they ever are going to. If you read what they have said, because on the a lot of it is about building AI into the background of search, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that. And Google's already doing that with Gemini, right? Are we going to have this interface where you can basically text with Google? I don't know if they feel that's the right experience, or if they really need to. Everyone has to recognize that even though Bing Chat is a superior experience at the moment, it's not like millions and millions and millions of people, flooded and to start using Bing. No one uses Bing when compared to Google. Google still owns 96% of the market share. So Google has time. There's no pressure there for them, in my opinion. They have more pressure from TikTok and Instagram than from Bing right now, in my opinion. And when you, I don't know if anyone ever listens to Google's earnings calls or things of that nature, but their CEO came out and said a few things. We were already experimenting with Gemini in search, where it's making our search generative experience faster for users. We've seen a 40% reduction in latency, yada, yada, yada. So they're not talking about SGE. But they're not also saying that they don't know. There's no like definitive like, yeah, we're going to launch this thing, man. Like, we're ready. We're going to launch this thing. But the next thing they said is that when we test search generative experience, particularly against everything that's out there, and we see the progress we were making on how much users are liking the experience better, we feel very good on the progress. And our roadmap for 24 is strong, both on search and underlying AI progress. So again, like, is this thing going to launch this year? I don't know, everyone. I don't know. I don't know if it's going to launch this year anymore. I could see it maybe in the future in a different form, or who knows? They might hit the go live button tonight. They might have done it while I was on this rant. But take that into consideration, that this thing might not launch this year, and there's a good chance it won't. But that AI is being built into the background of search, and that's what Google really cares about. When you read through the lines and you read through a lot of the stuff that they talk about on their earnings calls and things of that nature, they talk a lot about building AI into the background of search, and not necessarily it has to be this thing that's in your face. And you're going to start to see that in a lot, that you're going to see this permeate through everything in Google, which they've already shown, like kind of sizzle reels on. But, take that into account. That SGE, I'm not 100% sure it's going to launch this year. Will I continue to talk about and report on it? Absolutely, because it does continue to change, and it's still fascinating. And we do need to be prepared, because if this does launch, it will be disruptive. So we definitely have to be prepared, and we need to we need to be responsible to know that it probably is coming at some point. But with that said, we talked a lot about algorithms today, but the only algorithm that matters is the heart, mind, and soul of your customer. If you create great content that they like and love, everybody, they will come back and be customers for life. We always do office hours, but unfortunately, everybody, we are canceling it next week because I will be in the Caribbean on vacation. With that, everybody, thank you so much for spending 30 minutes of your valuable time with me. I say this every time, but this is my favorite part of my job, and I would not be able to do it without all of y'all. Thank you so much. I am off to Jamaica on Saturday, and I will be gone next week, but I'm looking forward to our time together next month. So thank you once again, and we will see you next month. Take care, everyone.